Try to bring some closure, although I don't believe in closure. I believe everything is to be continued. So my plan was to discuss 14 letters, but we've barely made it through 2. And somebody asked me, are you done with Aleph? And I started laughing because you can never be done with Aleph. So without, I think the important thing here is to engage in the process and to kind of consider this methodology as a different way of approaching the deep questions about who we are and where we're headed, especially trying to understand the letters of the spiritual world. Our theme throughout these 5 nights has always revolved around the building of the divine just state. The prayer in the dua of iftitah, Allahumma inni narghabu ilayk fi dawlata kareem tu'izzu bihi islam wa ahla wa tudhillu bihi nifaq wa ahla. Now I won't do a lot of reviewing tonight because I want to continue from where I left off last night, which was the introduction of the Vikings. And I think this was a very key moment that I wanted to show you, but we didn't get to do it. But this is a perfect moment to consider, especially on the day of the martyrdom of Imam Ali, because as you noticed, we've been talking a lot about Ali saying that he's the dot, and we've been talking about connecting the dots. And Ali is not only the dot, but he's also how we connect the dots. And so the dots between the different faiths, the different systems, the different points of history, the different linguistic ideas. So we'll watch about 20 seconds of this video. This is a scene from The 13th Warrior. This was a movie that starring Antonio Banderas in 1999. And it's based on Viking lore. And this is the scene where he does the prayer before they go into battle. So I want you to watch this because I think this scene helps us kind of have a visual of the kind of conversation I wanted to bring today. Go ahead.
Take your shoes off too.
Merciful Father, I have squandered my days with plans of many things. This was not about that. But at this moment, I take on create the next wow.
Okay, you can stop it. You can stop it. Okay, can you go to the PowerPoint now?
Sure.
Okay, start from that slide. Okay. All right, so that scene depicts the 13th warrior. The 13th warrior is a figure that comes back to restore justice in the world. And as you can see, we've already gone through this part. So Valhalla is the place where all of the warriors go to after fighting courageously, establishing justice and doing things like that. And so what you saw is that they do a sajda, and this is their prayer. There's 2 versions of it. So in the movie, the prayer is up there. So it says, "Merciful Father, I have squandered my days with plans of many things. This was not among them. But at this moment, I beg only to live the next few minutes well. For all we ought to have thought and have not thought, all we ought to have said and have not said, all we ought to have done and have not done, I pray thee, God, for forgiveness." Now, in the original Viking prayer books, you see what's on, it's the one below it. So it's kind of close, but it's basically this kind of dream to join the other courageous warriors, the martyrs, in Valhalla. And Valhalla is, as we mentioned before, we didn't mention this, but Valhalla is that place that reunites the souls with the god Odin. Now, who is Odin? Odin is the supreme god or the supreme spiritual being of the Vikings. That's where we get the word Wednesday from. It comes from Woden's day, right? And Thursday being Thor's day. So these are, and Friday being Freya's day. So these days are part of the Viking spiritual narrative. And what's interesting about Odin, Odin is compared to the sun. And in the Viking stories, Odin goes into a cave and is meditating, and all of a sudden he gets revelation, and he goes and gets the letters, and he brings down what's called the Rhines, the alphabet of the Vikings. So you can see a very powerful similarity to the story of when the Prophet Muhammad gets his revelation on the mountain, right? He's in the cave, he's meditating, and then all of a sudden the revelation comes, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read in the name, proclaim in the name of the Lord who created, right? Khalaq al-insana min alaq. Created the human being from that which hangs. And so those first 5 verses that were revealed are the beginning of the call. And this is what Iqra means. Iqra means the call. And I want to take you back to that moment where Moses alayhi salam was in the valley of Tuwa, the holy land. And the book in which explains, the Old Testament book that tells us the details of that story is in Hebrew called Va'ikra. Va'ikra means and the call, right? It's translated into English as Leviticus, but you would never know Leviticus is Ikra, right? So again, the connecting of the point. So Moses' call to the mountain is also Ikra, right? Because Muhammad is basically another Moses, right? He's following almost to the T, or to the dot, should I say, the footsteps of the Mosaic process, right? So Moses got his moment of truth, his revelation at the mountain. So does Muhammad. So does Odin in the Viking lore, right? And when you look at kind of, so we've already watched this. When you look at kind of the influence of Viking spirituality, it really shows itself in this narrative. When you look at, Forbes magazine recently talked about the 5 happiest, talks about the happiest countries in the world, right? And the countries, and these are the standards they use. They look at GDP, life expectancy, social support, generosity, freedom, and corruption. And the 5 countries that rank the highest on the world's happiest stage, the world's happiest scale, are 5 Scandinavian countries steeped in Viking spirituality. Viking spirituality is a deep part of their culture, right? And, you know, in Daniel McCoy's book, The Viking Spirit, he goes through all these details about how Viking ethics and Viking culture and Viking courage and all these things has influenced Scandinavian culture. And so what people often miss is they don't see that this Viking lore is actually relevant in today's world, when in reality it is. And so this made me think about one of the prophecies that we have from the Ahl al-Bayt in terms of where the Mahdi will emerge from, where the representative of God will emerge from. And you know, the Scandinavian countries are very icy countries, very cold countries, right? But we have a prophecy here that says, when you see them, then give. So there's going to be, the beginning of the prophecy talks about how there will be all these people fighting in the name of Islam, and they're fighting over treasure. They're fighting over worldly things. And none of them will get it. None of them will attain it. So they're all Muslims. They will be fighting for treasure, and none of them will get it. And at that time, the black banners from the east will be raised, and when you see them, then give the pledge of allegiance to them, even if you have to crawl on ice to reach them. So it's a very interesting prophecy when it says, you know, ice is the furthest thing you think about when you think about the desert terrain of where a lot of these battles are taking place. But it's also, remember we talked about how Islam, when it reappears, when it reemerges in the end times to establish a divine just state, it will seem like a totally strange idea. It will come from a place that is very strange. And so that perspective, aligned with this perspective, starts to make a lot more sense. That perhaps the divine just state will reemerge, and this new interpretation, this not new, but an old interpretation, an inner interpretation of the Islamic lore will reemerge in a place that we had not imagined. A place where we would have to crawl on ice to get to, right? So this is something that helps us further connect the dots and see how the divine arc of history is progressing and moving towards the establishment of a divine just state. For the divine just state is a universal just state. It is not beholden to any particular nationality, language, religious group, or any local contextual kinds of limitations. So we're going to continue our journey. I just wanted to make sure I concluded that point, and you had that image of how deep the Viking connection is to the narrative, the divine sunnah of the establishment of the divine state. We're going to travel all the way east, further east. We're going to go to India. And I've briefly talked about this on a one-to-one level, but I thought it would be also good to make sure that we hit this point in these nights. Because often when we think about Hinduism, Buddhism, we think of it as something very foreign or outside the fold of the Semitic traditions. And again, this prayer comes from the Veda, comes from the books of the Hindus. And you know, the word Hindu is actually a misnomer because it simply is a term that started with Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great came and said this is the religions of the Indians. And so it's not really a definition about what their process is. So we have to dive a little bit deeper into this. So this kind of shows you some of the prayers. You know, I wanted to give you this example. And the reason I think this is an important one, because this is the oldest religion in the world. The Indian religions, the Hindu religions, are 3,000 years BC, right? It's one of the oldest established faiths that we know of. And then comes the Egyptians, and then Zoroastrians, and so on and so forth. And then we come to the more modern faiths defined by the Semitic faiths. But the connection to Krishna is something that is counterintuitive to the contemporary Muslim, Christian, Jewish mind, right? They see this as a polytheistic religion, a religion that is so outside the fold that perhaps it's not even worth discussing. But I want to take you to some of the end time eschatology of Hinduism. As you know, there's a concept in Hinduism known as the avatars. The avatars are supposed to be beings, spiritual beings that represent the higher realms. And this process of history continues and is general until we reach what's called the 10th avatar. The 10th avatar is the one that removes all darkness and injustice from the world. That's its job. And its name is, as you can see, the Kalki. And you know, being someone who's looking for things, you know, I looked at this word, I said, wow, well, you know, there is Ali in it. You know, there's a K, an A, an L, and another K and I. But, you know, I didn't want to just take the easy road and just say, you know what, it's just, it's Ali, and so on and so forth. What I did was I asked some people who were experts in Sanskrit. I said, what is this word? Who is this end-time savior that the Hindus are awaiting? Why is this his name? What is the etymology of this name? And The story goes that it is a warrior with a sword, riding a white horse, and destroying and fighting against Kali. Now this really confused me. I said, oh, this might not be good for what I'm looking for. This will totally destroy my whole theory that Ali is the connection. Because Kali is the personification of evil. Is the one who has risen to this point where it's imitating the Ali. So now it started to make sense a little bit more. It is like the concept of the Antichrist. The concept of a Dajjal. Why do such concepts exist? What is the purpose of the antagonist? Let us go back to the hero's journey, the heroine's journey. وَجَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوٍّ. And we have raised for every prophet an antagonist. This makes us ask why there's always got to be a Pharaoh, why there's always got to be a Nimrod, why there's always got to be a Muawiyah, Yazid, all these confrontational characters, till such a point where we reach this pinnacle antagonist. Now, why do you think the pinnacle antagonist is called Ka'ali?
Does it mean against?
Oh, we'll get there. Hold on. So, there's a rhetorical question right now. So the preposition kaf in Sanskrit is just like the preposition mim in Arabic and Hebrew. It means one who is. So one who reaches a high point. So the Ka'ali is someone who reaches a very high position and assumes to be that. And the Kalki is the one who comes and vanquishes that so that there is no more evil, no impersonation in the universe. Pure truth, pure justice, pure equity. That's the purpose. That's the moment where the light vanquishes the darkness and all inequity and injustice is removed. Very powerful story, right? That the 10th avatar is supposed to come and create that divine just state after the world has been filled with corruption and injustice. Sounds familiar? Sounds familiar? Eerily familiar. 3000 BC, right? And here is, I brought it from the original text in case you didn't believe me. I'm not obviously an expert in Sanskrit and this stuff, but I am looking for those kinds of connections. And you can see that it describes in great detail. It describes in great detail the process in which the Kalki defeats the Kali. And then all the nur and all the light starts to spread through the earth. Now, you know that the ultimate zikr, the ultimate formula of remembrance in the Hindu religion is the Om symbol. And Om constitutes 3 letters. It literally means the highest. And it is, a lot of Hindus will wear that necklace. You'll see it all over. You'll see different versions of it throughout history. So I did some research and I looked at how this symbol looks in the ancient Sanskrit. So you have how it looks in Sanskrit on the left, and on the right we have the script of Ali in Arabic. It is eerily similar, eerily identical. So identical that it makes you wonder, right? That how could Ali exist in 3000 BC? At least, the story is so identical that it begs the question of the reality of what the concept of Ali is. That yes, we have the story of a person who was born at a certain time in 600 AD and then was martyred 63 years later in the mihrab. But what was the reality of this Ali before that? So in the Battle of Siffin, I'm going to tell you two stories from the Battle of Siffin. Battle of Siffin, as you may know, is a battle when Ali ibn Abi Talib was the Caliph of the Muslims, and he had an antagonist by the name of Muawiyah. And this Muawiyah refused to give allegiance to Ali, so there was a lot of civil war. During this time, I'm going to tell you two episodes. During this time, Ali is on his way to Siffin and he has some of his companions. And they meet a Christian in Damascus. And the Christian from Damascus asks him a question about who he is. And he goes through a long narration about who he is. He says, I am known in the Torah as Aria. And they know me in India as Christian. And he continues to give all the different names throughout the world in which he is known. I was looking for the Viking one, but it wasn't there, unfortunately. You can't have a self-fulfilling prophecy in all these research questions. But the idea that he's Christian was there. And this makes us think about that the Nur of Ali, the spirit of Ali, the word of Ali, the letters of Ali precedes the body of Ali. Unfortunately, in today's world, we are so focused on the literal and on the body and the physical that we are not looking at these questions through the lens of the spiritual. In fact, one of the tricks that Muawiyah did in the Battle of Siffin, and his top lieutenant was very smart in a Machiavellian way of smart, suggests to his soldiers and said, you know what? Let us put the Qur'ans on a spear, and this will make the army of Ali not fight us. So they raised the paper Qur'an on a spear, and they put it up, and all of a sudden the troops on the side of Ali became confused. They said, we can't fight the Qur'an. They are people of the Qur'an. They are reciting the Qur'an. We can't fight them. And Ali says something very riveting and powerful at this moment. Do you know what he says? He says, Ana Qur'an natiq. That is not the Qur'an. I am the Qur'an. I am the speaking, living, embodied Qur'an. Qur'an is not something that is dead on a page. Qur'an is something that is living, eternal. It is an eternal call. And at that moment, he shows us how you go from a nuqtah to a natiq. You go from something small and invisible, something unknown, to the leader of one of the biggest empires at that time. And he's saying, I am the speaking Qur'an. But the people left the speaking Qur'an, the living Qur'an, for the dead Qur'an. And this has been our dilemma ever since. We are constantly in a rush, in a hurry, to recite and recite. And we have forgone reflection, context, relationship. It is typical in Muslim culture to run through the Qur'an, recite the entire book, which is okay, a good thing. I don't say don't do that. But there's very little remembrance of the living Qur'an. I was joking with one of my friends. I said, you know what? We've only covered 2 letters in the last 6, 7 nights. While everybody is in a rush to keep reciting and finishing, we're still in the dots and the first 2 letters. But that is exactly the process of this that Amir al-Mu'mineen is modeling. That an hour of reflection truly is more important than a lifetime of prayer and fast. On this night in which he is martyred, he writes a will to his sons. He says that bringing together brothers and sisters who are in conflict is better than a lifetime of prayer and fast. He says there are so many people for whom fasting is nothing but hunger, and prayer is nothing but tiredness. But the Almighty Allah loves the fast and the prayer of a thinking person. And the word nuqta, nata, the speaking, this is something that is related to our ability to think, our cognition, not only our brain, but our spiritual cognition. Because the soul also has a way of thinking. And it thinks through these letters. The letters of light. The muqata'ah. These letters of light through which Amir al-Mu'mineen says about the knowledge of Salman al-Farsi. He says that Salman, with only his knowledge of the ya and the sin, is enough to vanquish all the knowledge of all the worlds. So spending time on these details is very important. It may seem like insignificant, but it is the height of significance. Because oftentimes great things are packed in very small places. And in our lives, we're always moving from one dot to the next. But we're not paying attention. So now, with this connection to a religion until 50 years ago was the biggest religion in the world. Hinduism, Buddhism, these are all religions that cover a 40 to 50% of the world. But when you interact with especially people in the Middle East or people who are of the Semitic faiths, especially with the scholars of these faiths, a lot of times they don't see a connection. In fact, when it comes to ceremonial laws, a lot of times the discussion is, are these impure or pure people? And instead of investing themselves in trying to uncover these deep secrets and mysteries, they are passing judgments on whether you can shake their hand or not. And this is embarrassing. And this is a reflection of our distance from the Quran and Natiq. And this is a direct reflection of why Islam has become a stranger. Because we have attached ourselves to the flesh of the Quran and abandoned its spirit and light. And I'd like to conclude with a personal story of how I actually came to see this. It's not because I was researching and I had a friend in high school. And he came from a Hindu family. We were very close friends. We were friends since 3rd grade. We used to have discussions about these matters all the time. A couple of years ago, on the night of Shab-e-Jomeh, a night that we dedicate to Imam Ali, I told my dad, I said, you know what? I haven't visited this family in a long time. Because my friend, he died of leukemia when we were in high school. And those scenes were very vivid for me. So it so happened that I decided, we had this discussion with my dad. I said, well, what about Imam Ali? What about this? You're going to a Hindu's house instead of going to Dua Kumail. I said, I'm just going because I'm going to go see an old friend's family. And we talked all night. We talked all night about all these issues, about just retelling memories. And at the end of the night, the mother, she's like crying the whole night. The house was almost exactly as it was 20 years ago. She took out her necklace and pointed it to me and said, this is the necklace I bought with the money he left behind. And when I saw it from an angle, the first thing I thought was, this looks like Ali. And then she turned it straight forward, oh, it's not Ali. But this was bothering me all night. And when I just went and did some research, I found all these sayings connecting the divinely inspired religion of Krishna and the wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And I said, wow, how Allah gives when you're seeking something sincerely. I don't know Sanskrit, I don't know. When I show this to a lot of Indian people or Pakistani people, it shocks them. Because, they have a very long history of division and hatred and mutual exclusion. And when they see this, it starts to crack a long generation of walls that have been built up. For Ali is the one that connects the hearts. And he will continue to do this in ways that we don't imagine. And we have to be willing to travel, even crawl on ice, to find it. For if we don't want to share the Alawi message, Ali himself will rise from the ashes of Vikings and from the depths of the Hindus and wherever else this message has gone. So we should consider ourselves very fortunate to have at least gotten the outer part of Ali. But we should hope that we receive the inner Ali, the Nur of Ali. And in that is our destiny. That will light up the path of where we are and where we're headed. So we are grateful for this, and inshallah tomorrow we will wrap it up, and I hope that this is starting to make a little bit of sense if it's not making sense yet. But I'm really trying to, this is the first time I'm talking about this subject and these subjects. It is not a very commonly spoken about knowledge. And I just kind of gave you how sometimes you learn these things. It's not so much through books and study, but it's also through relationships. Relationships with these people from different faiths. And I'm not just talking about politically correct relationships. I'm talking about deep relationships. Not worrying about whether you could shake their hands or not, or whether they're najis or not. Instead of approaching relationships ceremonially, we should approach these relationships with a deep sincerity and a sense of faith, and through that, the revelations and the truths will come. So with that, I conclude. Any questions or comments before we move to the next thing? Yes?
Something about the Vikings. Is it true that the Vikings were invited into Russia to organize the Russians, and apparently Russia comes from rowing? Is that actually true?
I don't know about that. I'm not an expert on the Vikings. I should be very clear about that. These are things that kind of come along as you do some research. I'm more interested in kind of their theology and their language and their symbolism, and how that has come about, and how the stories that, and when I say mythology, I don't mean that it's not true. I want to clarify that. Mythology does not mean that this is not true. It just means that it is, it's a story, and as you can see, when you go across different parts of the world, myths are basically constructions of a reality. There might be aspects that may or may not be historically true or not, but to me that's not important. The fact is people use these stories to develop themselves and have a sense of self and have a plan for their lives. And that is the part that's true. And that's the part that I think is worth our attention. You know, the very fact that Vikings are burying themselves with the kafan, with these inscriptions on it, to me, is mind-boggling. And so that's as far as I know in terms of the connection. Now, were the Vikings like pure people, from what I know? Just like any people. There are good people and bad people in them. They did barbaric things, they did crazy things, but at the same time, you know, you have this vision into and you know, I think this is a good invitation for us to familiarize ourselves with it. I see many people, especially where I live, they have Viking tattoos. Like the one that I showed you with Valhalla, the 3 triangles, they have those tattoos. And you know, a tattoo means that you're really trying to send a message of something really dear to you. And it's a good opportunity for discussion, right? So you have to have some knowledge of it. And as I said before, I mean, Viking culture is all embedded in this Western world, right? Our days of the week, think of the thing that you think about the most. The days of the week are rooted in the Viking spiritual language, right? And a lot of Christianity actually adapted itself to those Nordic stories, like the Christmas tree and all these things. So they adapted themselves to that narrative. And so no one is even, it wouldn't have been on anyone's radar to look for the connection to Vikings, especially through the name of Amir al-Mu'minin. To me, that's a tremendous miracle.
And just a comment. A few years ago, I lived for about a year in Denmark, and during that time, I noticed a lot of similarities in social justice, you know, how they do things there, and the Ali's idea of social justice. Whereas, for example, every neighborhood has this office called committee, and that committee is especially responsible for like anyone that is poor or needy, or and everyone in the neighborhood is responsible to respond to that person immediately. And that's very much similar to what Ali is telling us. And for me, it was just like somewhat simultaneously fascinating, but yet sad that I had to see that in practice in that land, but almost in none of the Islamic countries you would see that.
I don't think it's necessarily sad. I know what you're saying, though, because it's all part of the same story, right? If it's being practiced there, then it's being practiced there. These are laws of nature. These are laws of the spiritual world. So whoever does it, I mean, where you find Ali and Islam and all these words the most explicit, you'll also find a lot of antagonism and fighting against those same people, right? I mean, these are the lands that also killed Ali, so you have to remember that. These are the lands that opposed Ali. And so that legacy is still part of the current culture, and that's why I think we have to be very reflective and honest about it when we look at, especially Middle Eastern culture. It's both a land of great struggle and tribulation. And so you have to really, what we call tafkik, you have to kind of dig and dig until you, a lot of these things that we're talking about are not part of the mainstream training of even scholars. This is not part of the mainstream knowledge that scholars of faith of religion are trained with. So they're not even looking for these things. I think it's absolutely essential for every so-called religious scholar to be trained in multiple languages of the world, especially the ancient languages of the world. Yes, I saw another hand.
How old is the Viking culture?
These artifacts come from 900. I think I don't recall exactly, but I would think it's like at least 1,000 years. I'm not sure. But when Panita Don Marquis, do you remember? Did anybody remember that? So I kind of have a different appreciation for that. People used to say, no, this is a foreign cheese, we shouldn't eat this cheese. But now that you said this point, maybe that was an indirect way for us to have Denmark and these Scandinavian cultures kind of on our radar a little bit. But
I mean, one thing you would really see that's how kind they were to each other. Truly what Ali was always emphasizing on, you could see it in practice. And without egoism, without expectation, something that always bothers me, lack of in our own culture and our own society. We talk about it so much, but it's just not there.
Sometimes that's the case. Well, I mean, I think the happiest country scale is a good proof of that. I mean, sometimes the influence of a culture is different than the rituals and the ceremonies that a culture does. Like if somebody's practicing the truth, then it's going to manifest itself in that way. So that Imam Ali says, wherever the truth is, you need to grab it. It's the lost jewel of the believer. So.
Along that line, a couple of years ago, PBS did a special on what brings you happiness. And so they covered people in Denmark. And so what they figured, what gives you happiness, when you participate in a communal activity, so when you feed people who need food, or whatever, even if it's a game, if you play with a group of people, it gives you more happiness than if you do something individually.
That's what it said in this Forbes article. If you read it, just Google happiest countries in the world. It'll go through all their metrics, and it talks about giving is what makes you happy. And so this confirms that point. When you live, like America, where do you think America was on that scale?
Great.
It was like 15th or 16th. But what's interesting, do you know which part of America is the happiest? Which is the happiest state in America?
New York, Montana.
Minnesota. Come on, man. Minnesota Vikings.
So along that line, people who cook for others. So in Denmark, they were talking to a woman, and she decided to live in this area because once a month she gets to cook for the entire community. And that's something, we sort of want to play that here, right?
Yeah.
Like on Thursday night, we have Dai come in, we tell people to have a potluck. The concept is you cook and you see other people enjoy, you enjoy more if you just cook it for yourself and eat it yourself.
Yeah.
But if you give pleasure to other people eating the food that you cooked, and that gives you happiness as well. So that's something we need to consider. We could practice it in our community.
Yeah, in fact, in this study, they show that some of the most unhappiest countries are the richest countries because they have a culture of greed and pleasure seeking and all that. Not like Brunei is a perfect example. It's one of the richest countries, but its people were like the lowest in the happiness scale.
Once Socrates was asked this question, and I guess, by Plato or whatever, and what is the best reward for one who does good? And Socrates thinks for a few seconds and says, simply the good feelings that he gets.
Yes.
And I think, that's very true.
Right. Okay, so with that, we'll continue to be sort of concluded tomorrow. Okay. Thank you.